There comes a moment in life when you realize that not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Not because you think you're above them, but because you've fought too long and too quietly for the peace they treat like it's worthless. You've endured storms no one saw. You've bled in silence, stitched your own wounds, buried your breakdowns beneath polite smiles. And now, the people who were never there during the fall suddenly feel entitled to your rise. But here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Some people aren't toxic by accident, they're toxic by design. They don't just test your patience, they burn through your boundaries. They tear at your clarity with questions they already know the answers to, just to keep you spinning in self-doubt. So let me ask you, how much of your life have you spent defending your peace instead of living in it? How many times have you mistaken chaos for love, guilt for loyalty, or silence for safety? The Stoics understood something we still struggle to grasp, that freedom begins the moment you stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You don't owe them access. You don't owe them your reaction. What you owe is to yourself, the stillness, the clarity, the sovereignty of a mind that no longer needs to prove its worth. If that truth cuts close to the bone, stay with me. And if you're ready to start walking the path of self-mastery, where peace isn't begged for, but built, consider subscribing. To follow the quiet voice inside you that's finally ready to be heard. Do you know why it hurts so much when someone disrespects you? Because deep down, part of you still wants them to see you clearly. You want them to understand the weight you've carried, the effort you've made, the quiet ways you've shown up, even when it hurt. There's a voice in you, tired but hopeful, that still whispers, maybe this time they'll get it. Maybe they'll finally say, you were right, but they won't, because toxic people aren't looking for truth. They're not looking for healing or clarity or resolution. What they want is control. What they feed off isn't understanding, it's reaction. Every sigh, every angry reply, every text you type at midnight trying to explain yourself again, that's the currency they live on. And the more you invest in being seen by someone who's committed to staying blind, the more power you hand them. The truth is, they don't need to raise their voice to shake you. They don't need to argue or scream. All it takes is a small, deliberate jab at a place they already know is sore. A joke about something you once opened up about. A passive-aggressive silence timed just right to make you spiral. A carefully chosen phrase that sounds neutral to anyone else, but you feel it like a punch. And without even realizing it, you're back in the dance. Justifying, defending, proving. You feel your energy draining, your center slipping, and your peace dissolving, all because someone poked the right wound. But what if you didn't respond this time? What if their bait landed in empty space? What if the silence they used to weaponize was met with your stillness, not your panic? Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but will grow in size." And that's what reaction does. It feeds the cycle. It makes the chaos bigger. But when you stop reacting, not out of fear, not out of apathy, but out of intention, you interrupt the entire pattern. You step out of the game, and suddenly, they don't know what to do with that. Your calm becomes confusing, your lack of engagement unsettling, because when you stop feeding the dysfunction, they feel the emptiness left behind. Stillness is a form of strength. But it's not the cold, silent treatment kind. It's the grounded kind, the kind that knows the difference between walking away and running away, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. The Stoics believed that your greatest power lies not in controlling others, but in mastering your response. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And that's what toxic people hope you never discover, that your response is yours, that your peace is yours, that your sense of self is no longer up for negotiation. It's not easy at first. You'll feel the urge to speak, to clarify, to make them understand. But slowly, you begin to notice how freeing it is not to chase clarity from people who thrive on confusion. You stop handing out explanations like apologies. You stop playing therapist to people who never wanted to heal. You start pulling your energy back, moment by moment, breath by breath. And it's not about cutting people off with bitterness. It's about stepping back with clarity. You don't need to make an announcement. You don't need to slam the door. Sometimes the most powerful exit is a quiet one. When you begin to live like your peace matters more than their opinion, something inside you starts to settle. The knots in your stomach loosen. The pressure in your chest softens. You stop living in reaction to other people's dysfunction. You start creating space, clean, quiet space, for your own healing. And in that space, something new grows, a different kind of strength. Not the strength to fight harder, but the strength to not fight at all. Not every storm is worth walking into. Not every comment deserves your energy. Not every person who triggers you deserves access to your thoughts. And they'll notice. They'll push harder at first. Try louder tactics. Try sweeter ones. They'll test the boundaries they once walked all over. But this time, they'll find you unavailable. Not in a cruel way, in a powerful one. Because you've remembered who you are. You've remembered that your peace is not a gift you owe anyone. It's a home you build inside yourself. And you don't let just anyone walk through your front door anymore. So when someone tries to draw you back into the chaos, pause. Let their words echo into nothing. Let your silence speak. Because if they can't shake your calm, they can't control you. And that, more than any argument, says everything. Stillness isn't weakness. It's the kind of power that doesn't have to announce itself. It doesn't enter a room and demand attention. It simply holds space. And when you finally reach a point in life where your peace matters more than being right, something shifts. You stop feeling the need to defend yourself at every turn. You stop proving, explaining, justifying, because you realize something profound. The truth doesn't need noise. It doesn't need to be packaged with disclaimers or delivered with force. The truth stands on its own. And when you stand with it, you don't have to chase anyone's understanding. You just live it. That's what strength actually looks like. Not in the shouting or the arguing or the emotional fireworks, but in the quiet, grounded presence of someone who knows who they are. It's precise, focused, steady. The kind of strength that doesn't react to every provocation because it doesn't need to. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." It's one of those lines that cuts deeper the more you think about it. Because we've all been there, spending our energy resisting someone's dysfunction, thinking we're standing our ground, when in reality, we're just feeding the cycle. Every reaction gives the chaos more space to grow. But when you stop responding, when you stop engaging with what's trying to pull you down, something powerful happens. The storm doesn't get louder, it begins to fade. Because without your energy to sustain it, dysfunction runs out of fuel. And the silence you hold, it's not distance for the sake of revenge. It's not a power play, it's clarity, a declaration, not to them, but to yourself, that you're no longer available for the same old games. You're not cutting people off to punish them. You're just choosing not to keep handing out parts of yourself to people who never knew what to do with them in the first place. That kind of silence isn't cold. It's clean, and it clears space for something better, for growth, for healing, for real connection, the kind that doesn't need to be earned through performance or people-pleasing. You begin to live differently, speak less, but mean more, react less, but feel more in control. You don't need loud comebacks or dramatic exits. Your absence becomes your answer. Your peace becomes your posture. Because when you live like your worth is already known, You stop trying to prove it to people who couldn't see it, even when you screamed it. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That's the essence of stillness. Revoking the power we've given to things, to people, to habits that once shook our foundation. It's not passive, it's active. It's choosing over and over again not to let someone else's chaos become your home, not to let every insult become a wound, not to carry the emotional weight of people who never tried to lift yours. Stillness isn't the absence of emotion, it's the mastery of it. It's feeling the anger rise and choosing not to let it spill. It's hearing the passive-aggressive remark and choosing not to dignify it with a reaction. It's knowing you could fight back and still choosing peace. Not because you're weak, but because you finally understand your power doesn't live in someone else's recognition. It lives in your restraint. The more you practice it, the less drawn you are to the noise, the less tempted you are to re-enter rooms you've already outgrown. And they'll notice. The ones who used to feed on your reactions, the ones who relied on your emotional energy to validate their own dysfunction, they'll feel the shift. Not because you made a dramatic exit, but because you stopped playing a role in their story. And that absence, it echoes, not in volume, but in clarity. It makes them face something they've avoided all along, that their power only existed when you gave it to them, and now you're holding it for yourself. You begin to understand that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's sacred, that you don't have to justify your silence, your boundaries, or your growth. You just have to live it, and the right people will feel it not as rejection, but as refinement. Because the people meant to walk with you won't be shaken by your stillness, they'll be grounded by it, and the ones who thrived on your instability, they'll quietly fall away. Not because you pushed them, but because there's no chaos left for them to cling to. You don't need to say much. Let your life speak. Let your consistency, your calm, your clarity be louder than any argument. And when someone asks what changed, you won't need a speech. You'll just smile, knowing that stillness was never weakness. It was power all along, silent, focused, unshakable. You know what's more unsettling to a toxic person than confrontation? Composure, not because it's passive, but because it's untouchable. See, confrontation gives them something to grab onto. It opens a door. It tells them you're still emotionally invested, still available for the back and forth, still willing to burn energy trying to be understood. But composure, that ends the game before it even starts. It's like showing up to a match they've trained for and refusing to play. You're not throwing punches. You're not even throwing words. You're simply not stepping into the ring. And that silence, it drives them mad because they can't spin it. They can't use it against you. It's clean, controlled, final. That's when the tantrums begin, the escalation, the sudden urgency to provoke something, anything, to get a rise out of you. So you just don't care anymore, they say. But it's not that you don't care. It's that you've started caring about the one thing they've always asked you to trade, your peace. And when that becomes your priority, the whole dynamic shifts. You stop being predictable. You stop being easy to pull back into the drama. You become grounded, focused, and strangely calm in the places where you used to crumble. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that's what they're really doing when they provoke you. They're trying to shift the discomfort away from themselves and onto you. If they can make you react, they don't have to reflect. If they can spark an argument, they don't have to face the truth of what they've done. Your reaction becomes their escape route. That's why your composure is so disruptive. It forces them to sit with their own chaos. And for someone who's spent years avoiding it, that's terrifying. You may not even notice the moment it happens. When you start pulling your energy back, it starts small, a delayed response, a shorter message, a choice not to engage when something feels off. But to them, it's a shift in gravity. The version of you they manipulated is fading. The one who over-explained, who stayed in one-sided conversations, who tried to keep the peace by sacrificing their own, gone. And what's left is someone they don't recognize. Someone who walks away instead of arguing. Someone who doesn't feel the need to correct every misinterpretation or defend every silence. Someone who just doesn't show up to be drained anymore. The thing about toxic dynamics is that they rely on your participation. They're built on a loop: trigger, reaction, control. Break the loop and the whole system collapses. But breaking that loop takes clarity, and clarity often looks like stillness, like choosing not to answer right away or at all, like realizing that some conversations were never about resolution, only about maintaining control. And when you stop playing along, when you stop needing to be heard by someone who only listens to twist your words, you get something back you didn't even know you lost: your center. This doesn't mean you've stopped feeling. If anything, it means you've started feeling more clearly. Less fog, less confusion, less second-guessing yourself after every interaction. What you're experiencing is the difference between emotional survival and emotional sovereignty. You no longer hand your peace over just because someone's loud enough or close enough to demand it. You've stopped offering your energy in places where it's only ever used against you. That's not cold, that's wisdom. Seneca once wrote, "No person has the power to have everything they want, but it is in their power not to want what they don't have, and to cheerfully put to good use what they do have." You begin to realize how much power you've always had, but gave away. How often you traded your own clarity for a moment of being understood by someone who had no intention of understanding you. And once you see that clearly, you stop trading. You stop bargaining with your own peace. They'll try to bring you back. They'll try new tactics. Apologies, guilt, confusion, disguised as concern. But this time, you'll see it for what it is. And because you've done the inner work, the pull won't work. You'll feel it, sure. The old patterns don't disappear overnight, but they lose their grip. Because you've anchored yourself in something stronger than the need for approval. You've anchored yourself in your own self-respect. And that's something they can't reach. So when someone comes at you with their old tricks, their manipulative tones, their carefully crafted guilt trips, pause, breathe, and remember, they can't play a game you're no longer playing. You don't have to explain your growth. You don't have to apologize for your clarity. The people who belong in your life will feel the shift, and they'll rise to meet it. The rest, they'll fall away. Not because you pushed them, but because you stopped holding the door open. And that's the beauty of composure. It doesn't scream. It doesn't chase. It doesn't plead to be understood. It simply stands still, confident, peaceful, and unshaken. And for someone who's used to chaos, that's more powerful than any argument you could ever make. Let's be clear. Detachment doesn't mean you stop feeling. It doesn't mean you shut down, disconnect, or go numb. Detachment is not coldness. It's clarity. It's not that you no longer care. It's that you no longer carry what was never yours to begin with. The Stoics never taught emotional suppression. They taught emotional discipline. They didn't say, "Don't feel." They said, "Don't be ruled by what you feel." There's a difference, a powerful one. And when you start to live from that place, not in resistance to emotion, but in mastery of it, you begin to experience something most people rarely do: peace that isn't dependent on anyone else's behavior. You start to realize that not every feeling deserves a reaction. Not every discomfort needs to be solved in the moment. You're not suppressing what you feel. You're refining how you express it. Because there's a kind of emotional presence that empowers, and there's a kind that exhausts. What you're learning is when to stay open and when to step back. When a conversation is a bridge that builds connection, and when it's a trap door designed to pull you into someone else's chaos. You're starting to hear the difference between a question meant to understand and one meant to control. You don't jump to answer everything anymore. You don't chase closure from people who were never honest to begin with. That's the quiet shift that changes everything. You stop handing out front row seats to people who only show up to criticize the performance. You stop explaining your value to those committed to misunderstanding it. And instead of performing for approval, you reclaim your inner theater. You protect it like something sacred, because it is. Not everyone gets to see that part of you anymore, not because you're closed off, but because you've grown intentional. Carl Jung once said, "Solitude is not the absence of energy or purpose, but the presence of peace and clarity." That's what detachment feels like. A quiet kind of power that doesn't need to prove itself. And when you hold that space long enough, something in you begins to strengthen. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become harder to shake. The noise around you doesn't vanish. People still test boundaries. Challenges still come. But your response is no longer dictated by the storm outside. You learn to return to yourself before you return a message, to ground yourself before you engage. Because you've seen what happens when you don't. You spiral, you snap, you shrink into someone who no longer feels like you. And the cost of that? It's too high. You're not willing to lose yourself just to keep someone else comfortable. This doesn't make you distant, it makes you deliberate. You still show up, you still care, but you care better now, without leaking your energy all over every interaction. You realize that presence isn't about constant availability, it's about conscious engagement. You're no longer addicted to being perceived as good or agreeable. You don't need to soften your truth just to make someone else feel okay about crossing your boundaries. And if someone mistakes your stillness for coldness, that's not your burden to carry. The right people won't be confused by your clarity. They'll feel safer in it, because they're not looking to pull you out of yourself. They're looking to meet you in your center. Seneca once wrote, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." You start to see how much of your life has been spent scattering your energy, overcommitting, over-explaining, over-correcting, and now you're calling your energy back. Not with grand announcements, but with quiet choices. You don't respond to every jab. You don't show up to every argument. You don't water relationships that only grow when you're bleeding. Because you've come to understand this, not everything that invites you deserves your presence. And not everyone who reaches for you has the hands to hold you. The more you embody that, the more natural detachment becomes. It's not forced. It's not performative. It's just a knowing, a stillness in your body that says, "This doesn't belong to me." A calm in your chest that whispers, "You don't have to fix this to be worthy." And that's when you begin to live differently. You slow down, you stop reacting, you start observing, and through that observation, you gain control, not over others, but over yourself. You begin to notice who brings peace and who brings pressure, who nourishes your spirit and who leaves it cluttered. And in that noticing, you begin to choose, not out of fear, but out of alignment. You choose fewer conversations, but deeper ones, fewer connections, but truer ones. And maybe, for the first time in your life, you realize that you were never too sensitive. You were just too accessible, too open to energies that didn't know how to respect your depth. But now, you're not closing your heart, you're just raising the standard for who gets to be near it. That's what detachment really is. It's not escape, it's evolution. It's not about running away, it's about standing so still that chaos can no longer reach you. And in that stillness, you find something that noise could never give you: yourself. Quiet, clear, whole, unshaken. You want to know when the shift becomes real. It's not in the grand gestures. It's not in the fiery confrontation or the dramatic goodbye. It's not in the moment you finally say everything you've been holding in. The real shift happens quietly, when you simply decide, without anger, without noise, that you're no longer going to show up to be misunderstood, that you're no longer going to hand your time, your softness, your presence to people who only know how to twist it. There's no need for an announcement. The moment you stop playing your old role in someone else's script, the whole scene changes. And you don't need to slam the door, they'll hear it close just the same. That's when they start to notice, not the version of you they pushed away, not the one they overlooked, but the space where you used to be. It's not your anger they feel, it's your absence, the silence, the calm, the refusal to explain yourself one more time. And that absence, it echoes louder than any final speech ever could, because for the first time they don't have access to what they always assumed would be there: your energy, your attention, your emotional labor. They don't miss you in the way you might think. They miss what you gave them, the free fuel, the emotional response, the willingness to keep the conversation going even when it was draining you. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And in that spirit, this kind of departure doesn't need words. You're not talking about boundaries, you're living them. You're not threatening to walk away, you already have. Not out of spite, but out of clarity. You've stopped negotiating your peace in places where it was never valued. You've stopped asking to be seen by people who were only ever looking through you. And that's when you begin to feel your power again. Not because you've become colder, but because you've become more self-aware. There's something deeply liberating about walking away without bitterness, without the need to be heard one last time. Because you finally understand that being heard by someone who isn't really listening is its own kind of silence. And you're done speaking into that void. You're done writing essays in defense of your worth. You're done selling yourself short in places that gave you nothing but confusion in return. There's no resentment in your departure, just resolve. A quiet reclaiming of your own energy, your own time, your own peace. The people who once relied on your reaction may try to pull you back. They may poke at you the same way they always did, expecting the same old result. But this time, you don't flinch. You don't take the bait. And in that stillness, they begin to feel something they didn't expect. The consequences of losing access to someone who always showed up, even when it hurt. That's the part they never anticipated. That you would stop dancing in circles. That you would stop over-explaining. That you would stop letting them rewrite the narrative while you played along for the sake of harmony. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." And that's exactly what this kind of quiet exit is. Not revenge through cruelty or control, but through evolution, through refusing to mirror the dysfunction, through letting go without needing to prove anything. You walk away, not because you want to hurt them, but because you're no longer willing to keep hurting yourself. You've changed the rules, not for them, but for you. And anyone who wants to be in your life now has to meet you where you are, not drag you back to who you used to be. And it's true, some people won't follow, not because they can't, but because they don't want to rise to that level of mutual respect. And that's okay, because you're not here to be accessible to everyone. You're here to be available to what aligns with your peace. From now on, your presence is something people earn, not with charm or guilt, but with consistency, with care, with clarity. If someone can't meet you there, they don't get to meet you at all. That realization doesn't come easy. It comes from heartbreak, from exhaustion, from running in emotional circles until the dizziness becomes unbearable. But once you land in that stillness, once you understand how rare and valuable your peace really is, you begin to protect it like something sacred. And that quiet strength, it speaks louder than anything you could ever say, because silence, when it comes from clarity, doesn't create distance, it creates depth. It becomes a mirror that reflects what you will and will not accept. And in that reflection, you finally see yourself clearly too, not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone who has already chosen themselves. But you're done negotiating your peace. You're done selling yourself short in places that never gave you change. From now on, your presence is earned through respect, through care, through clarity. And anyone who can't meet you there won't meet you at all. When you stop chasing peace in places that only bring pain, something inside you begins to settle. You realize you were never too much. You were just offering too much to the wrong people. So protect your stillness, guard your energy, and let your absence speak where your words no longer need to. If this message spoke to you, there's another video on your screen that will take you even deeper. Keep walking the quiet path forward. You're not alone.